Check. Yo, I'm making short-term goals when the weather falls. Yes, put away the leathers and put ice on the gold.
All right, we're talking Big East today. We got a couple of good teams. Got a deep conference. I'm gonna break my conferences down into tiers. So, I'll have like tier 1, which will be like your teams that are definitely competing. Like in the deeper conferences too, it's going to be, the tiers are going to be a little bit more to separate them. But I'm going to kind of tier them as if like, my top teams are kind of the tier 1 of this conference. And then I'll have like the middle of the road teams as tier 2. And then like tier 3 will be the back half. Or if I have like a lot of teams, they'll probably be 4 tiers. But regardless, so let's talk about the teams, the top tier teams first. And top tier team number 1 is going to be Villanova. I have them at my number 1 spot. There's been a lot of talk about, are they number 1 in the Big East, or is Xavier number 1 in the Big East? I'm going to have to go with Villanova as my number 1. They've looked really good this year. They got a really deep team. Jalen Brunson is now a junior. He's been playing since he was a freshman. And I really like what I've seen out of him. He's a very good point guard. And then when you talk about some of their wing players, Phil Booth, he's coming back after injury from last year. Mekhi Bridges, very, very good defensive player, very long, lanky guy. Tough to face on the defensive end, and he can definitely come down on the other end and dunk on you. And then Dante Devashenko, the little white boy, he was a freshman last year, kind of came on around this time, which is like January. He kind of came on this time last year. And this year he's been there all year. He's been playing really good for this squad. When you talk about some other players on this team, Eric Paschal is another player that was good last year. That's here. And then Omari Spellman is a freshman that's definitely made a little bit of an impact here at the first of the year. He redshirted in 2016, so he's been there for a minute. Jay Wright's going to have this team ready when the tournament comes around. I think this is a good team. This is definitely a team to continue to watch. They had a tough game against Butler last weekend, but that's the one team that they play really bad against. I think that they'll play good for the rest of the year. This is a really good team, and we'll see them deep into the tournament. Xavier, another very good team. When you talk about Trevon Blewett is back. He had a pretty good year last year. He's a very streaky shooter, you can say. He gets very hot and he won't get shut down. And then there's other games where he can't make a basket. But he's a very good player. Some other players, J.P. McCura, little white boy, number 55, another real good player. Both these guys are seniors this year. They were juniors last year on I think Final Four Elite Eight team. They lost in the Elite Eight. And then some of the guys that came on late last year that were good, Quentin Gooden, Kaiser Gates, those guys are starters now. Tariq Jones is a sophomore. He didn't play a whole lot last year, but he's their main big guy. Sean O'Mara is still there. He's a senior. He kind of comes off the bench, plays good minutes. Xavier is a team that definitely has the ability to make a deep run. They have the ability to win the Big East, but more importantly, it's not as much about winning the Big East. It's more about getting into the tournament, and I think both these teams are definitely primed to make the tournament and make a good run in the tournament. So really good teams here. So my third team, they're they could be considered tier 1, but I think they fall more closer to tier 2. Is Seton Hall. Seton Hall returning most of their starters from last year, only losing Madison Jones, which he was not that big of a key for them last year. And they, the Kadeem Carrington's back, very good point guard. Angel Delgado, the walking double-double, he's back. Going to be a really good year for him. Miles Powell really came on this year. He was a freshman last year, got to play at times, was kind of learning the system, learning the college game. He's lost a lot of weight. I think he was 250 or so. He's at 195 now. He lost the weight 2 years ago. He was pretty skinny last year, so that's not something new. Desi Rodriguez is a stud, real good player. The one thing I will say about Seton Hall is they got 4 guys that really score the points, and if those 4 guys don't show up, they're kind of fucked, and you can tell the games that they show up and the games that they don't show up. This is a team that's going to be good. I don't know how deep they're going to go in the tournament, but they're going to be a good team, and they're going to be scary with the amount of seniors that they have. They have Sonogo too, who I didn't really mention, but he's a senior also. Desi Rodriguez is a senior. Kadeem Carrington and Angel Delgado are all seniors. So this is a team that's definitely primed to make a push in the postseason. We'll see what goes on with Seton Hall going forward. Kind of a surprise team, I guess, a surprise team out of this conference this year. And every year they're kind of a surprise is Creighton. Creighton's always, projected not to be as good as they're projected, and they usually end up being pretty good. Marcus Foster, the transfer from Kansas State a couple years back, he's continued to lead this team. He's probably their best scorer. And then you talk about Kyrie Thomas is their other key guy, pretty good scorer, can step out, shoot the three, but he's a lockdown defender. He can really lock down your best perimeter shooter. And that's really important in the Big East. There's a lot of good perimeter shooters. So Kyrie Thomas is huge for that. And then you talk about Martin Crampel. He was a freshman last year that played 6 minutes a game, and he has came on like a light this year. He's 6'10", and he scores mainly trash points. He doesn't take a lot of bad shots. He gets a lot of rebounds. He reminds me of Mahmoud from Louisville. He reminds me a lot of him. Just a lot of trash points. He can get blocks. And this team has some other players on it that are kind of just glue players. You talk about Ronnie Harrell, Davon Mintz. Those guys start. Mitchell Blaylock, who's a freshman, who had a couple of good games. He hadn't played as good lately. And then Tyshawn Alexander has been getting to play a little bit this year too. Those two guys are freshmen. I think Creighton definitely could be a tournament team. I think that they probably will get into the tournament. I like what I've seen out of them this year. They played good in their non-conference, and I think they'll continue to play pretty good in the conference schedule. Next team on my list is going to be Marquette. I really like Marquette this year. Their ability to shoot the ball with Marcus Howard and Andrew Rousey, those guys just kill it. Shooting threes, they're not afraid to shoot. And the thing is it's one of those things like the way basketball's gone is like either your team shows up and you're going to win by 10 or 20, and y'all are shooting threes and y'all are going to win by 10 or 20, or your team doesn't show up at all and y'all lose by like 5 or 6 to a bad team. So the college basketball has gotten way more of a, let's not get to the big man. Like, it's about shooting threes. It's about either we're on today or we're not on today. And Marquette's a perfect example of that. If they come to the game and they can shoot, they can beat any of these teams in the Big East. But if they don't show up, they're not gonna be able to beat many of the teams. A couple of the other good players, Sam Hauser has been good. He played a lot of minutes last year. He's been pretty good this year. But it's mainly Marcus Howard and Andrew Rousey. Sarka Enem has played a bit. Jamal Kane has played a bit, who's a freshman. Henry Frawling, he's a sophomore transfer from SMU. They've played a bit, but this is a pretty young team, and with the exception of Rousey, he's a senior. I think Marquette is going to be a good team this year. I'm hoping that they make the tournament, but they're definitely on that bubble of making the tournament with a lot of good teams this year. My next team I'm going to talk about is Butler. Butler's a team that I wouldn't be surprised if they make an NIT. If they don't make the tournament, I wouldn't be surprised. They really don't have a whole lot of firepower. That win against Villanova is going to help. And I think they came back and beat Georgetown earlier in the week. So they're starting, Big East playoff 2-0, so that's good. But a team that really didn't challenge themselves in the preseason or, in the games that were challenging, they lost. Obviously, they have a good win against Villanova. That's going to help. But when you talk about their team, Kamar Baldwin is the point. He was a freshman last year, got to play a little bit, and he continued to play more as the year went on. But he's one of their better players. Keelan Martin's their best shooter. And he's one of those guys as if he's hot and he can't miss. And if he can't make it, then he can't hit the the front side of the backboard. So it's one of those things. He's real hot and cold. Some other players on this team, Tyler Weidman, who's a senior, he's had somewhat of a tough year, and he shares time definitely with Nate Flower. And then transfer from George Washington had a really good game against Villanova. We'll see if he can continue that play in the Big East. Paul Jorgensen. But to me, this is just a team that's in a tough conference with a couple of teams that are a little bit better than them. They're probably looking at an NIT is the way I would look at them. Now, Providence is projected to be really good this year. They have a lot of their players coming back. Ed Cooley is a pretty good coach. They made it to the first four last year, and they had a really young team. So I think, the mindset with the freshmen that he's bringing in, that this was going to be a pretty good team this year. And they can't shoot the ball very well. When they can shoot the ball, they do play all right. But when they can't shoot the ball, they're pretty stagnant. Karan Cartwright has been injured at times this year. He just recently got an ankle injury. And if he's not in the game, this offense just doesn't move. He's one of those point guards that's a machine. He makes the offense work, and they don't work that well when he's not in. Rodney Bullock has been good, but it really seems like he's the only guy really out there. Emmett Holt hasn't played at all this year. Alpha Diallo's played a bit. Isaiah Jackson's played a bit. Jalen Lindsey is a pretty good 3-point shooter. And then you talk about some of the freshmen that have came on. Makai Ashton Langford, which is a pretty good player. He's been good, but he's just a freshman. Nate Watson, he starts, and he's been good. Going forward, Providence will continue to have a pretty good team. I don't know if this team can make the tournament this year with the tough conference that they're in. I think, Marquette and I think even Butler, like I said, is probably better than Providence, and maybe Providence isn't better than Butler, but, hot takes here. And so then St. Johns is the next team. St. Johns is definitely played really good against Seton Hall last Sunday without Shamari Pons, without Marcus Lovett, their two leading scorers, probably their two best players. So that was really good to see that. When you talk about St. Johns, and Chris Mullins, they had a tough year last year, but they've already won 10 games this year. I think something that it took them a long time. I think they didn't reach 10 wins until late February last year. So this is already a much better team than it was last year. This team is on the way up. Shamari Pons, like I said, Mark Lovett. Shamari Pons is definitely their best player. And then, Bashir Ahmed has been playing pretty good. He's kind of like that third guy. Now, a guy that I've really liked lately is Tariq Owens. He is a monster on the defensive end. He makes some pretty good dunks. I've seen him step out and shoot a couple threes. This is a guy I'm really liking. He's a junior now. He's kind of gone under the radar the first 2 years that he was here. And and then they have a couple of transfers that have came in. Marvin Clark from Michigan State, and they also have Justin Simon from Arizona. He had a pretty good game. He had to play a lot more point guard in that game when they played Seton Hall, and he actually played really good. Now I think that we'll see more of that going forward for St. John's, and hopefully Samari Pons comes back soon, because if he doesn't come back soon, this team's going to be really done. And now let's talk about DePaul. DePaul, I forgot who they played the other day. I think they played, who was it? DePaul played, I can't remember who DePaul played the other day, but DePaul played somebody the other day and they gave them hell. And Eli Kane, pretty good little point guard player here, guard, probably their best returning guy. Devin Gage is another guy that was pretty good last year. He's played a little bit. Tredarius McCollum was another guy that I liked when I watched him last year. But Eli Kane's their main returning starter. Now, they've had a lot of help with newcomers this year, and I think that's what's really helped DePaul out in David Lateo. Max Stross from Lewis University in Illinois, he transferred over. His mom actually went to DePaul, so he came over here to DePaul as a junior. He's having a really good year. He's just a white boy that just can ball, 6'6" guard. And then they have Marin Maric a 6'11 guy from Northern Illinois who's been good. Austin Grandstaff from Oklahoma, who's a sophomore from Rotwell. And then Jalen Butts, he's a freshman. He's coming in, and Justin Roberts. Justin Roberts is a small little dude. He's 5'11", but he can ball. He had a really good game. I can't remember who they played last week, but he played really good. Really tried to help the Blue Demons get a win last week. They came up short. I think they were playing Xavier is who they were playing. Yeah, it was Xavier. That's right. So then Georgetown. Georgetown took a lot of slack all year because their preseason schedule. They didn't really challenge themselves. They beat up on a lot of bad teams, and then they had a game against Syracuse, which they played very well. Now, Syracuse wasn't hitting shots, and if Syracuse isn't hitting shots, it's hard for them to win, but their zone defense kept them in the game and was able to get the win over Georgetown in overtime. And that would have been a good win for Georgetown. I think it would have gave them some momentum heading in to the Big East play. Didn't win the game. Jesse Govin is their best player. He averages about a double-double. He's kind of the focal point, and it's not a surprise in a Patrick Ewing team that Jesse Govan is the focal point, a big man, 6'10", 270 junior. Some other good players, though. Marcus Derrickson has been good, kind of playing power forward type. He's good at getting the boards around Govan and stuff like that. And then Jagan Mosley, who's a sophomore, has played good at times. And then Jonathan Mulmos is a senior from New Orleans, Louisiana. I said New Orleans, Louisiana is what I should have said. But he's a senior this year. He didn't play a whole lot. He played a lot of minutes. He doesn't average a lot of points or nothing, but he's a good little game manager. I like him. I see him. And talk about some new guys coming in. Jamarco Pickett's a 6'9" freshman out of Washington, D.C., real good player. I think he'll be a good player going forward. And we'll see what happens with him. And then, Trey Dickerson, a transfer from South Dakota, who's a guard. I don't know if I've seen him play much this year, but Georgetown's a team I hadn't watched a whole lot of. I only really watch teams that kind of challenge themselves in the preseason. So, I'm not going to be watching some bullshit ass Maryland North Shore versus Georgetown type shit. But I think that it's going to be a tough year, Patrick Ewing's first year, in a league where St. Johns has improved, DePaul has improved. Butler and Marquette are no slouches. And then, Seton Hall and Creighton are kind of creeping higher to the top tier than they are the bottom tier. And Providence is kind of fallen a bit, but Providence is a veteran team, and they could rattle off a couple wins when Cartwright gets healthy, and they could really put themselves in a position at the end of the year to look good in the Big East. So we'll see what happens with the Big East. A good conference. Player of the year, Jalen Brunson is what I'll have to say. Defensive player of the year, I'm going Kyrie Thomas. Most underrated player, I'm going Matt Strauss, transfer over. And then newcomer of the year would definitely have to be newcomer. I might have to switch that and go most underrated player. I'm going to go most underrated player, Devin Divashenko, and I'm going to go the newcomer of the year, Matt Strauss, out of DePaul. But that was just kind of off top.
OC niggas. OC niggas. Come on.